technology happening.
Now, Richard Rambarran, I know that we've had a lot of internal discussions, but let's share some of those discussions externally now, because I've been given the time warning that we have a few minutes left, but I wanted to flip the switch and talk about the economy. And I use flip the switch out of joke and fun because apparently Georgetown is or is not a mode. But you and I have talked a lot about what the virus itself and the infected persons, as well as the stay-at-home orders will do to the economy. What message would you say, in this type of forum? What can we
Yeah.
expect to happen in our economy?
So thank you, Nick. And I think we have focused a bit of the discussion on the public health impact of it. But the part for me that is especially worrying is the economic impact of what will happen. So there are two components of what's going to happen here: the public health impact and the economic impact. And that in particular is where we as economists and persons in public policy, etc., need to begin to divert some of our attention. Those, of course, who are not on the front line and battling. I don't want to miss this point because I believe that it's of utmost importance within the public policy arena. The point that was made by my namesake earlier about that reassuring role that governance has, and public officials with the confidence of the population, sending credible signals to the society that this will be okay, that this is reassuring. It's not just good for persons to understand and to have a leader to look to, but also for the mental health of many. Some persons are home for weeks at a time currently, and people really have not been able to. So I want to say that the art of public policy has to encapsulate that element of good communication, and it has to be in a way where it's not condescending or somebody talking to children or so. It has to be in a way. I mean, if one looks at Mia Mottley, for example, Prime Minister in of Barbados, you can see that humanistic element and that human touch coming out. But I just want to say also the point coming a bit more focused on the economic aspect is that the point that Dr. Carpin raised earlier from a layman's perspective gives us a very good platform upon which to premise the discussion, or the remainder of the discussion, is that there is a tremendous interdependence that exists in the economy. Firms produce, consumers consume, consumers provide their labor to firms, and firms give them goods and services. Persons utilize transport to go around, and they all depend on each other. It's a mutually reinforcing relation, and it's one that is very much interdependent. Now, if you look at the nature of this crisis, a lot of persons are attempting to compare it to the 2008 crisis and maybe even in the 1918 influenza epidemic that besieged England and other parts of the world. But I would reckon to say that this crisis is a little bit unique because in 1918 you had some war production which offset some of that negative impact on the economy. In 2008, the difference with that crisis, this one, is that the recommendation to keep this virus in check is one of social distancing, which means that persons should not be going outside. Now, that is a very interesting perspective from a public policy and from an economic impact perspective, because what it does, it limits an individual's ability to physically go out and spend. And they are not in economies like ours that are not very complex or advanced or modernized in the way that consumers consume goods. What we'll find is that a person's commodity basket or a person's spending power will really be geared only towards the essential items. Why is that so? One, because they can't physically go out, but two, because of the amount or the quantum of uncertainty that's prevailing in the economy at this point in time, and the amount of uncertainty that people have generally. So it's very much needed for reassurance to be given. Now, I want to just separate the economic impact into two parts very quickly. One, we have to look at directly right now what we are going to do. And I think that at this point, and I see that colleagues around the world in the profession share a similar view. Right now, we need to just have spend, spend, spend on this crisis. We need to be able to limit the public health impact on this crisis, because in the medium to long term, that will have a debilitating impact on our economy if we allow this to continue
Now,
unmitigated.
now, Richard, let me ask
Yeah,
you a question. How is a government that has not doesn't have a parliament behind it because it's pretty much in a caretaker mode, and last budget in November 2018 going to
yeah.
spend in this crisis?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Nick. So that's a very relevant question within the context of Guyana. Now, it's a very worrying situation because there are two types of interventions that a government can make. Central bank can intervene through what we call monetary policy, changing interest rates, etc. But the most important and the most potent for a country is what we call a fiscal stimulus. Now, in a situation like this, you would have had ordinarily a finance minister approaching the budget, approaching the parliament with a supplementary budget, in particular a fiscal stimulus package to a certain extent, and having that approved by parliament. So the absence of parliament is impacting on that ability for a finance minister to approach Section 23, I believe, of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, for those who are interested, outlines clearly what those measures are. But we currently don't have a parliament in place. Our elections continue to be dragged on, and the outcome is unknown. And this is actually going to have a serious and a material impact on how we recover from this virus, and not even how we recover, but how we are able to right now mitigate the impact in the economy. Because what you will find is that around the world, one thing economists are agreeing on is that at this point, government should intervene to offset some of that impact that is had from this crisis. So they're calling for things like helicopter money, which is essentially giving persons money into their hands to ensure that they survive. How we are going to do something like that in Guyana this time, I am not sure. I do believe, though, that we do have some creative measures that we can undertake. So, for example, I am not sure if the government has explored this, but one can ask for a reprogramming of monies, donor monies that have already been disbursed to the country, and reprogramming it towards expenditure for this public health crisis, given the nature of it. And there are other very many creative ways. But in this scenario and in this situation, we really do find ourselves with our backs up against the wall. And this political scenario which we have is really not helping the economic situation. So right now, I think for Guyana's quagmire that we face, the fastest way out of this is to ensure that that is solved so that we have the ability to enact a fiscal stimulus package and even protect the welfare of the average Guyanese citizen. Because that,
So,
in effect, will in turn create social instability.
so you're saying essentially, with basically the election being dragged on, we are fighting this crisis with one hand behind our back.
I would say one of our hands are chopped off and the other one in our pocket. That would be the way that I would put it. Because our ability to bring forth fiscal stimulus packages is almost nil. And if you look at how our responsiveness has been thus far, Nick, you will find that it is very wanting in that regard. Because the Guyana Revenue Authority can only do so much. You'll only find them changing payment dates. You'll only find them waiving what they can waive, etc. But the real power comes from the Appropriation Act. which has to be passed by Parliament. And the real powers to impact the situation in a material way will come through in Guyana's public financial framework, will come from the finance committee, one which is fully installed and enjoys the powers, etc., fully accorded on to the person after.
Thanks for that. Unfortunately, this brings us almost to the end, and I would like to get some closing statements. So let me start with Richard D. Lead us off